welcome to the study guide on YouTube for Transgender Ideology and Gender Dysphoria, a Catholic Response. We're looking at Chapter 7 here, the science of the transgender brain, really from the years 1995 onward, because we looked at the history of transgender science. We looked at Blanchard, who was big during the 80s, early 90s, and now we're looking at some of the science. But before we get into are there male features in a female transgender brain or vice versa, you have to first determine, well, are there even such things as gendered brains, right? It's actually an important question to consider first, is are there male and female brains? So this is just section 7.1 of chapter 7.1 of the book. I think I can do 7.1 in one video and the rest of the science in a different video. So I think there'll only be 2 sections for chapter 7, but we'll see. If it gets too long, I might break it up further. This is, again, I think it's important first to lay this out. So Catherine Wu, she wrote for Harvard. She was a grad student. Now she has a doctorate. She writes, Between the Gendered Lines, the Science of Transgender Identity. She wrote, Several studies confirmed previous findings showing once more that transgender people appear to be born with brains more similar to their gender, which they identify, rather than the one to which they were assigned. So it's saying, if somebody was male to female, their brain is more similarly female than male, or female to male more similarly male. So this is a very bold claim, saying the science has confirmed this. So these studies that Catherine has pointed to, I will then look at in section 7.2, 7.3, 7.4, and onward. But again, I think first we have to say, well, when you're saying that people who are transgender have a brain like that to which they identify, you have to say, well, again, are there gendered brains, and what does it mean? What does it mean to have a male brain, and what does it mean to have a female brain, right? What are we talking about if we're saying that they are different, right? Because if you say, well, there's a male heart and a female heart, is there, right? It's like maybe different size, but is there a different morphology? Not really, right? Different male liver, female liver, maybe size, but otherwise not so much. Right? So what do you mean brain? Brains are more complicated than hearts or livers. Now, a different argument that's made is that of the second wave feminists, right? They've been making this since the 1960s, that there is no difference between male and female brains. The difference between males and females is entirely social, right? It's a matter of social, it's just cultural, right? That's the only difference between male and females. If male and females were brought up in a gender-neutral society, men and women would act and behave and see the world entirely the same, that there is no difference, particularly no notable difference between men and females other than that which is social, right? So that's a different claim. So if that claim is correct, then there could not be such thing as a male or female brain, because male and females have the same brain, right? So that would be a big claim, right? And this is one of the main arguments of gender critical feminists or TERFs, right? Trans exclusionary radical feminists, is coming out of second wave feminism, because you're saying, well, there is no difference between men and women. So if you're saying, well, I'm really a woman, well, what on earth does that mean, right? There's no difference. Dr. Paul McHugh was a very faithful Catholic and has done a lot of work for the church on these issues. He also goes along with the second wave feminist in some of his writing, saying that there is no difference between a male or female brain that's significant. Therefore, to say, well, I have the wrong brain for my body, he said, wouldn't make any sense, right? He's probably not doubting that male brains are 8% bigger than female brains, right? That's objectively true. But just in terms of gender, it's not in the brain. right, is not particularly in the brain. It kind of goes along with the feminist in this approach of saying, this gendered brain is just a social construction. It's not biological. Now, I don't think that that is correct, but it's a very good argument to try to win an argument. And Dr. McHugh uses this as well for the gay and lesbian issue as well. He would say there is no such thing as a gay brain or lesbian brain. This is entirely a matter of socialization and choices. If there is no such thing as a difference in the brain, then people are simply choosing it, and if you choose it, you could also choose not to do it, right? So it's a matter that we're talking about choice. There is no actual male-female brain, gay-straight brain. There are only brains. That's the argument, which is a good argument for the Generation Z, right? The youngest generation, because they kind of like that. If you say, well, there are no, right? Everything's a spectrum. Right? Everything is socially constructed. Everything's relative. There is no objective male brain, no objective female, objective gender, right? It's all, everything in some sense is fluid. It's simply a matter of choice. That actually is a pretty good argument that Generation Z could challenge Generation Z of saying, well, then if this is all true, then there is no such thing as a transgender brain, just choices. The unfortunate thing I would say is it's not true. There are gendered differences in the brain, and I think that's the third option, is this biological realism that I advocate for in this book, is that there are biological differences between male and female brains. Some of these biological differences affect what we call gender or expression of being male or female. Is it completely determinative? No, it's not completely determinative, but it is somewhat determinative. To say there is no difference is a lie. To say that there is absolute difference is probably also a lie. So we'll jump into what I think the biological realism of this is, using the science of today. So again, there's part of this debate is that of people like Helena Cronin, who's a Darwinian philosopher, I believe an atheist, or she's not defending the church or anything. She's a Darwinian, right, in London, and she says that the differences between the male and female brain is a result of 800 million years of human evolution, right? She would say, whether or not a little girl wears a pink T-shirt or a blue T-shirt, well, maybe it has some type of effect on the way that males and females act. But really, there's 800 million years of evolutionary differences that have been built into our person. Therefore, this might have far more influence than, what color you're wearing, right? This might make more difference. So, sorry, I had to teach a class. So as a result, Helena Cronin thinks that these differences between men and female are far more ingrained evolutionary differences than they are cultural. Now, Gina Rippon, who's a British feminist and a neuroscientist, she thinks it's all social construct, and she uses her work to try to prove the idea that there are no differences between men and female. A lot of people have recognized her, saying, well, her neo-science research has done more for the cause of women than any other feminist, which kind of makes it seem as if the feminism is more important than the science. I suspect that there is. Jordan Peterson, when he talks about the brain, the male-female brain, again, he's more of a psychologist than a neuroscientist, but he points out that there are differences between the male and female psychology. Might be very slight, right? It might be very slight. They could be mostly the same, male and female, but there are noticeable differences, right? So if we look at the U.S. prison population, nearly all violent criminals are male. If we look at mass shooters, nearly all of them are male. Nearly every serial killer is a male. And he points out that it's not that most men are murderers or violent. It's just the people who do those types of things are on the furthest extreme point of being antisocial, right? The extreme points of aggression and violence. Most males don't fit within that extreme form, but of human beings who are in that small minority at the far extreme, that 1% that is violent to that degree, they're nearly all men. So although there might be very similar, right, could be male and female might be very similar, there are consequences of them being different, like prison populations being almost entirely male. Is that a social construct? No, because these are people who actually conducted violent acts, right? It might be inconvenient to say, but it's true, right? They committed violent acts. That's why they're in jail. It's not because the jail system is sexist. So if we look at some of the theories, again, difference between male and female brains, there is things like the brain organization theory, sometimes called BOT, B-O-T. And it's this idea that the hormones that trigger the male and female brain formation during pregnancy also determine neural pathways in adulthood. So are there differences between male or female brains? Well, in this chart over my head, male brains are these dark gray and the female are these light gray. So when you look at the average, male brains have more volume. They're bigger, right? So they're 8% bigger than female brains. Could it be connected to the idea that men have, just in general, larger body morphology, right? They have a bigger skull, so they have a bigger brain. Doesn't mean they're necessarily smarter. Probably not. If that were true, you could look at a whale has a very big brain, and a parrot has a very small brain. It doesn't necessarily, size doesn't necessarily determine intelligence. But you could also see that females have more density in their brain, right? There's a greater density. It's more compact, right? So it's smaller, but it's more compact. So there is a morphological difference between male and female brains there. But what determines that, this is under the BOT theory, is also the chemical hormones that determine that might also determine pathways. Now, this above, that's in red and blue, is a sign of the pathways, right? So there are darker, blue is male, red is female. There are darker, there are more noticeable male and female pathways. They're very similar, right? You can see these nodules. They're somewhat similar, but there are distinctions between the male and female organization of the brain, which would have been a result of the hormones in the womb, right? This would be effect. When they did a 2018 UO Biobank study with over 5,000 studies of brains that they did with the MRI, the conclusion was we report evidence on the patterns of sex differences in the brain, volume, surface area, cortical thickness, white matter, microstructures, and functional connectivity between adult male and females in the range between middle and older age. And the consequence is this chart here, that there are differences between male and female pathways within the brain, right? You could say that there's not, but there are, right? There are differences. How much of a difference is there? Not a great deal, right? Not a great deal, but some. But when we think of this, again, like the Jordan Peterson example in the prison system, chimpanzees and humans are 99% genetically similar. That 1% matters, though, right? The 1% does matter. A very small amount could have bigger effects. Another theory that's very important is the brain matrix theory. Now, this is kind of revolutionary when you can think about it. So when we think about male or female brains, we often think of, fully male, fully female, and that there's very clear distinctions between the two. Sometimes feminist jokes say blue brains and pink brains, right? But what they're pointing out with the brain matrix is that when genetics has that kind of domino effect, the SRY gene has the domino effect of creating the male and female brain. There's pathways. It's like a set of dominoes, right? They go down different paths in a chain reaction. This is still in the womb. There are different morphologies and structures that are created based on male or female, but this is not a black and white thing. This is not all females it develops this way and all males it develops a different way. It's not as black and white as that. As you can see with this type of matrix, I think it's very easy to see physically. So each one of these numbers is a different attribute, a column that go down. And you can see the pink, the reddish, is more of the feminine trait, more commonly found in females. And blue is more commonly found in males. But if you look at any one of this brain, right, within any one of these given areas of the brain, there's varying degrees of how feminine or masculine it is, right? So there is blue in the female brain, right? There are blue attributes more commonly found in males, right? And there's some dark pink, really pink, and there's some light pink, not so pink, right? And in the males, there's some attributes that are more commonly found in females, right? So does that mean that this male has a 10% female brain? No, he has a male brain, right? And she has a female brain. But when we're looking at averages, within the averages, there are some elements that are more feminine and more masculine than others. And all of us are made up of these matrices. It's very unlikely that there's a male that has only blue, right? It's possible. Very unlikely. Or a female that has only pink, right? Again, unlikely. We are all some type of combination, but when you look at the average, right, we're looking at averages, we look at the average, you could determine looking at all this, well, this is a more feminized brain and this is a more masculinized brain, right? You could tell it's objectively true, but you can't look at just one point in the brain and say, well, in this one point, does this make it masculine or feminine? That one point might, like you look in this pink section, if you just point to a random spot, you might pick a blue spot, right? Most of this brain is not blue, it's mostly pink, but if you had to randomly select, you could accidentally randomly select a blue spot, or on the male, a pink spot. But no one thing determines it, right? It's the totality of the brain. Simon Barrett and Cohen in The Essential Differences talks about 14% of females and 5% and 20% of males have what is more like the opposite brain matrix, right? 14% and 20%. It doesn't make them transgender. It doesn't make them homosexual. It doesn't mean anything, right? Right? Just as if when you see people in society, there are more masculine and more feminine. There are more people who are interested in books. There's people interested in theater, sports, right? People are different, right? It's not just Barbie dolls and Marlboro men, right? We have a wide range of difference. Why is there a wide range of difference? Because each one of our brain matrices is very different, right? Not that there's only two. There's millions of combinations of ways in which these determine who we are, right? That adds some complication for some people, but this is accurate, right? To say, well, there are not male and female brains, so there are male and female. Well, we have brain matrices which are complicated, but there are. But again, we're talking about averages. there are also, these are things that are typically crystallized in the brain at birth up until 2 years of age. There's also elements of our brains that can be changed over our life, right? And in our time, we can't change everything, right? Most things are crystallized, right? They're formed in solid structures early on, right? Before we're even aware of it, they're formed. But there are things that can change, and I think sometimes people over-exaggerate this as something. So, can we change our brains? We can, right? Somebody who has an addiction of some kind and they overcome their addiction, they have literally changed parts of their brains, right? Right? Why do we do word problems and stuff? Right? We can keep our memories longer because we are strengthening our brain, or listening to music might change our brain, doing prayer or meditation might change our brain, reading art, right? There's things we talk about in our society where if you do these things, right, it strengthens the brain, it keeps our brain active and healthy, and it changes it, right, in some way, right? Somebody can be very angry, but you listen to some music and it calms you down, right? These are all environmental factors which change the brain, but it's not going to change anything fundamental about the brain, right? These are minor things, small things, right? Slowing decline, things like that, but not major changes, right? So people can sometimes over-exaggerate environmental factors, but you can't negate any environmental factors either. They have an effect. Mostly, there's a lot more to do with testosterone and estrogen in the womb, right? Far more to do with that than environmental factors, but there are some environmental factors. Now, are there differences in brain structures, right? Again, this whole section is there a difference between a male and a female brain? So, the answer is, yeah, there are. If you were to take a brain and give it to a scientist and they were to look at it, they could, without the rest of the body, they should be able to determine if it was a male or female body that it came out of. Sorry. If you look at things like the gray and white matter, the male brain has 7 times more gray matter activity, and female brains have 10 times more white matter activity. And these deal with the networking or connections between processing centers, right? So it deals with the way people process things. So male and female process different things based on gray and white matter. The Corpus Callosum, females have nerve bundles that connect the brain's 2 hemispheres, 25% larger than those found in men. So because female brains are more connected between left and right hemispheres of the brains, it helps them with verbal skills, right? This is, sometimes we think of left side, right side brain, but really it's more complicated than that. But females have better abilities to have verbal skills because of this larger difference. There's the temporal lobes. Females create more vital neural connections in their temporal lobes, allowing females to listen better and distinguish words with peripheral hearing. Women are always listening. It's the lesson of this. Neural connectors also help with memory and sensory perception. Therefore, the male temporal lobe will become more active only during sensory tactile experiences. So when men are working with their hands, they learn better. But when women are listening, they learn better. So differences between men and women's ability to learn is different based on the temporal lobe. The hippocampus is another one. It's responsible for memory storage. Males take longer to memorize objects, things like lists, but once they memorize it, they're solid, right? They're in there. Women can memorize them quicker, but they don't retain them as long, right? Because it's dealing with the hippocampus. The frontal lobe, females have more active frontal lobes, which makes them less impulsive. It makes them better gives them better executive decision making than males. Right? They kind of think through the whole thing before they act. Although, because men don't have as active as a frontal lobe, they're better to be more impulsive. So that's helpful in battle or combat to be more impulsive. It's better for strategy to have a more active frontal lobe. That changes things as well. The cerebellum deals with balance and physical activity, eye-hand coordination. It's larger in males than in females. It also creates greater blood flow, so it makes males better at athletics. So that's an important element. The amygdala is 10 times larger in males than females, and it's responsible for aggression, which would explain why men have more violent crimes, right? More violent acts, because they have a more active amygdala. But women, interestingly, when they have a familiar malicious object or person, they have more of a sustained response to amygdala. So women are able to hold grudges longer, right? If they see somebody they don't like, they might be able to hold on to the anger longer, versus the men it's more spontaneous. The Broca and Wernicke, I think there's an L missing, but Wernicke. Females possess more significant development in their Broca and Wernicke, in the temporal lobes, and they deal with language. So women are better at language because they have a more active sections of the brain. Again, not just that one. We've looked at 3 different sections where women's are stronger. So men are better at spatial objects and women are better at verbal skills. There's also dopamine, hormones, blood flow, and resting state. A lot of these are interconnected. Men have more dopamine, which makes them more spontaneous and aggressive. Hormones like testosterone make them stronger. Blood flow, they have a 15% higher, 15% less blood flow than females, which allows the brain to compartmentalize more. And this we see in the rest state, which is an interesting one. So when men are in a rest state, their brains nearly entirely shut down except for a few areas, whereas women's brains do not go into a rest state at all or very easily. The difference of this, and you can see this in activities, is men could fish all day long, right? Sit there with a pole in the water, perfectly fine, and they're enjoying it. Or hunting, they're up in a booth or something looking for a deer for hours on end or something like this. When they get into this state, their brains are nearly entirely shut off, so they're not bored. Unlike women, who would be bored out of their mind doing this because their brains are still fully firing in all areas. Therefore, they're going to be thinking about all the other things they could be doing, and they wouldn't be interested in doing that. So men and women have different rest states. Well, the rest state is very helpful for warriors or hunters, right? To have your brain kind of shut down and only be aware of what it needs to be aware of, versus women who need to be have a lot more peripheral hearing. You know, if you're raising children, you need to be hearing peripheral things and being active. Hunters less so, right? Soldiers less so. So these are very interesting differences within the human brain. So there's clearly differences, right? If you say, well, I don't believe in this one, that one. Well, there's dozens of them, right? Dozens of differences, and there are nearly infinite numbers of differences within the matrix, right? There is many differences within the matrix. Therefore, there is clearly male and female brains in different ways. The challenge now is that, right, you can take a brain taken out of the body and look at it. You can now determine male and female brains. So when somebody says, well, I have a female brain in a male body, or a male brain in a female body, well, we know that there are differences physically. Is that what you mean? Right? Is that what you mean? Are you saying you have a more masculine cerebellum, you have a more masculine frontal lobe, temporal lobe, right? These are measurable things, right? Gray matter, white matter, or are you talking about something else, right? The size of the brain, or are you talking about something more hidden, right? Is there something more hidden? Now, what we'll get into in the next topics is there might be something more hidden, right? It might not just be a matter of these bigger structures. However, this is the challenge. If, let's say, sitting in a body in the womb of testosterone, right, whether it's natural or something has interfered, some unnatural thing has occurred, that your brain is sitting in a pool of testosterone, you're probably not going to get a female gender identity section of the brain, but male other sections, right? If the brain is sitting in estrogen or testosterone in development, it should affect the whole brain, right? That it should affect the whole brain, not just this one small spot in the hypothalamus, for example. So this would be a bit of a challenge, right? And when somebody does come off and say, well, I'm transgender, we don't measure the brain, right? We don't look at these factors. We just take their word for it, which is another challenge to this, because there may be objective criteria, but are we looking at the objective criteria? These are things we'll get into in the next section. So I hope that's helpful for now. Just it can be debated, but I think there's fairly clear evidence that there are male and female brains.